this is one of a very few number of conferences like this, and I think you guys have the power to change education. It's not the administrators, it's not the superintendents, no offense to any superintendents in the room. It's what you guys do with data that matters. Now, what I want to help you this morning is paint a little bit of a different picture in terms of what we should be using data for. Because data is great, but only if you're measuring the right stuff, right? In other words, there's this old adage, this old story about how you're in your car and you're driving up north and you have all your data, right? You know how fast you're going, you know your speed, you have all this information and data, and you have to control it all. And you're driving north, but the problem is you're supposed to be driving south, right? So the data doesn't really help you that much if you're looking at the wrong perspective. So I want to help to change some of that perspective from you guys. So I want to start with some contact information, tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm the Education Evangelist at Google. I've been at Google for 12 years. I was part of the team, and when I mean team, I mean two of us that launched what we used to call Google Apps for Education into the university space. This is a picture of me and Adrian Sainer back when I had a lot less gray hair and a flatter stomach. I need to get back to that. Anyway, so 12 years ago, me and Adrian at ASU Adrian and I launched Google Apps at Arizona State University. Then I helped launch Google Apps into K-12. Oregon was the first state to buy into the idea of using Google Apps for school districts, and today we have 70 million users around the world using what we call now G Suite. A couple years into that, I was part of the team, and again, when I say team, two of us that launched Chromebooks into education, and Chromebooks have been doing pretty well in education. So besides my role at Google, I also teach classes at Arizona State University, and I am a 10th grade communication teacher. And I always worry about saying that because now all of a sudden now you're going to be judging me on my communication skills. So I teach at a school called the Phoenix Coding Academy, talking about data, how to communicate in this 21st century and what kids need to do. So I teach 90 10th graders, which is probably the most exhausting part of my job for those of you who educate and know what that's like. Some contact information. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I think that it's a great place to keep conversations going. It's a great place to meet lots of folks who are doing things in education. It's a great way to kind of keep messages around what's happening in education. I just saw a couple things about data science that I will be posting later this afternoon that I think you guys might find interesting. So I want to start with this idea of why we gather at events like this. Why is data important? Why is education important? Why do I get to travel everywhere. This week, I was in Alabama on Monday. I'm here today, Albuquerque tomorrow, whatever tomorrow is, and then Friday in New Orleans. And I go to events like this, or focus on education, and we talk about the issues in education. But why is it important? And I think sometimes we have to remember why it's important. And it's because education is what disrupts poverty. Education changes a family's destiny. Education, no matter where you go in the world, is the most important factor that people talk about in communities. It doesn't matter if you're in a big city like Chicago or in a place like Peru. The education is what's important. And for me, it's one of those things I often have a hard time forgetting because I'm one of those kids that education did marvelous things for. I'm a first-generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. Any New Yorkers in the room? Oh, you're usually louder than that, so it's been a while. Huh?
I'm pretty well behaved.
Okay, you learned how to behave?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been I grew up in Hell's Kitchen from the 70s and 80s, which was not a great place to grow up. It was a very violent place, a lot of crime, a lot of issues. I was born there, that's my school, PS 111, and I grew up with a single mom, on welfare and food stamps. And the reason why I get to stand in front of you is because of education. I went to high school, graduated, went to college, I graduated, went to graduate school, and I get to do this. And I've had some amazing milestones in my life that kind of illustrate and demonstrate the power of education. 2 summers ago, the First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, called and asked me to participate in a program that she was running called Reach Higher, to get kids to think beyond just graduating high school, to get them to think beyond just what a college degree is, but to think about what their careers are going to be, to think about the use of certification programs and community college and all these things. And so she ran this program called Reach Higher, and she asked me to come speak at her event that she was holding at the White House for 200 kids and all the organizations that support kids that are growing up the way I grew up. And I said, let me check my calendar. I wish I was that cool, right? No, but when you get invited to the White House, you don't know what to expect. I had no idea. But when you walk in there, you feel like it's 1800, right? And you feel the history of the building, and it's probably the most nervous I've ever been in my life, and I've been married twice. So the experience, when you at the end of the day, it looks a lot like this when you're speaking in the East Room of the White House, and it's surreal to the point where I still. Doesn't this look like one of those pictures you get at the state fair? Where they green screen you into the background? Actually, when I showed this picture, or I posted this picture, my friends weren't impressed that I spoke at the White House, because that's what your friends are supposed to be like. They weren't impressed that I owned a suit. That's what they were. That's what their comments were about. But that's the point, right? That's what the American dream is about. That's what we all work for, is that you can take a kid from Hell's Kitchen, New York, a hoodlum, and get them to speak in the East Room of the White House. That's the power that education has. That's one generation, right, that you can do that in. But here's the thing that we often don't think about. Whether you teach for 2 years, 20 years, 40 years, the impact that you have in education goes on for generations and generations. That the impact goes on for students that you will never meet in your entire life. Because now I have my kids. This is them. No, don't all them. You don't know them. If I told you when my 3-year-old called me the last time I gave her a bath and she wanted me not to get her out of the bathtub, but she called me. Anyway, there was so many mouths involved. Let's just say that. These are my kids. I have a 25-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 3-year-old. Yeah. I can only handle one child at a time. Because when one's done, I get another one. But my 25-year-old is living in New York City, actually in Hell's Kitchen, a block from where I grew up, and is working at CNN, doing her dream job. Graduated from college 2.5 years ago, and we never talked about college. We never had a conversation about whether she's going to college or not. She just assumed she's going to college. Because that's the culture she grew up in. She assumed she was going to college because I went to college, my mother went to college, people in her life went to college. She actually assumed, and this took like 2 years to get her over this, but she assumed she was going to graduate school because I went to graduate school, and her mother is a teacher, and she went to graduate school. She assumed I was going to pay for it, but that was the problem that we had. My 16-year-old isn't talking about whether he's going to go to college, now he's talking about what his higher education experience is going to be like, right? That's the real power of education, is that we have an impact on kids. They don't know that it's my 4th grade teacher, my 9th grade teacher, and the teachers in my life are the reason why they get to do what they're doing today, right? That's the impact that we have. And if that's true, then we should probably take education very seriously. And what we need to start with, when I talk about how we use data, is to start with the idea that we don't live in this world anymore. That we are no longer preparing kids for these jobs, that these jobs don't exist anymore. Now, I'm not one of those education reformers that are like, education is broken and teachers are terrible and all these issues, because I don't believe that. And one, because I'm living proof that actually education works, so I can't be that way. And second, I understand the history of education and the fact that we've done some amazing things with education, no matter what our scores are at the end of the day. The graduation rate in this country in 1910 was 8%. The content that we teach kids today is so much stronger than it was even 20 years ago. Most parents won't admit the age they stop helping their kids with their homework because it's too hard for them. For me, it was 4th grade. I'm like, I don't understand that. The fraction thing, you got to do that. So I don't like to look at it from the education is broken. We built a superpower of a nation on the back of the education system, from the first schools we built in Massachusetts through the GI Bill and everything else that we built into education. The White House actually just announced $200 million for CS programs, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we've done some amazing things with education. What I think is the better angle to look at this is to realize that what we need to do in education is take the best of what we know education is and bring it to the next level. and understand that we don't live in this world anymore, and that what we need to do is understand the world that we do live in and help our kids prepare for that future. Because at the end of the day, that's what we have to do. We have to help our kids prepare for the future. The problem that we're dealing with is that the future's already here. And a lot of that future has to do with computer science. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts there'll be 1 million computer science jobs available in the next 8 to 10 years. That number to me is soft. I think this impacts everything, especially around data science. It's not just computer science. It's not just coding. It's about the understanding of technology, understanding of computer science, understanding of the sciences behind what technology looks like. And this is in every state, every industry across the board around the world. This is the impact that it's having. It's also an economic issue. Because of the numbers that we have in computer science, for example, the average computer science graduate makes 40% more than the average college graduate. Here in Montana, the average computer science graduate makes about $64,000 a year compared to the average salary of about $44,000 a year. What's the impact to our communities if all of a sudden we can increase salaries by that much? And again, you might not think of Montana as a computer science place. You know, you think of California or New York or those things, but again, this is in every state I go to across the board. This is what you find. I wrote down some numbers for you guys. Right now in Montana, 20 years from now, right now, there are 519 open computer science jobs available. That does not seem like a lot, but when you compare that to the actual numbers of jobs available, that's almost 2 times the average of other industries. And in 2015, Montana graduated 75 computer science graduates. So you can see the gap between 519 and 75, and only 11% of them were female. In 2016, only 9 high school students took the AP Computer Science exam, right? How many took the AP History exam? How many took the AP English exam, or whatever AP program they did? And how do we fill that gap? Again, it's not that education is broken, it's that what we need to do is look at the next level of what education needs to look like to get us there. And when we think about the role of technology in all of this, we have to recognize and start with the understanding that we've been talking about technology for a very long time. Not just in education, across the board, right? I spend a lot of time on airplanes, and I think it's gotten to the point where airlines don't even, they've given up. They don't even tell you to put your phone in airplane mode anymore, right? They're just like, put your phone in airplane mode, and they don't care. Like, everyone's just sitting there on their phones anyway, but we've been putting technology on planes for a long time. Back in 1956, this is a hard drive that's being loaded onto an airplane. And you could lease this hard drive to do your data analysis, to do some computation, to store some data. You could lease this machine for $3,800 a month. This is 1956 dollars too. And it was a 5 megabyte hard drive. Right? Think about 5 megabytes in today's world, right? It's been a long time since we've done that, but it hasn't in terms of when we think about technology and education. We've been talking about technology and education forever. Motion pictures were going to revolutionize education in the 1900s. Television, where all we had to do was put kids in front of Sesame Street and everything would be great. In the 50s, and we've been talking about computers in education since at least the 70s, because I took a computer class when I was in 9th grade. Maybe the old people in the room like me will remember this. I took a programming class and I learned how to program in BASIC, which we need to bring back, by the way, because it's the only programming language I still remember. I took a programming class in BASIC and I learned how to, I wrote like 5,000 lines of code to make a bird fly across the screen on a Commodore 64. Anybody remember that program? Yeah. It didn't even look like a bird. It was just a squiggly line that just went back and forth. I'm like, that's not a bird. It's just a line that just flaps, right? So we've been talking about technology and education for a long time. So why is it different today on a global scale? Well, there's a couple of things that are going on. Back to my original thought is that we have so much research and data about what good education looks like. We know what good learning looks like. We know that it has to be relevant and engaging. We know it has to be personal. We know these things. We just haven't been able to implement them. You have all this data at your fingertips. You know how to make good learning happen. We just haven't been able to implement it until now. I think that technology is at the point where we can start taking advantage of that and help bring education to the next level. We don't even need to create anything new. We don't have to build anything new. All we need to do is, I challenge everyone to do this exercise in your free time. Take a great research article that you've read in the last 2 or 3 years, something that's research-based, not an educational week, but a real article, research-based article with the whole formulations and everything that describes to you what good learning looks like, and ask yourself, how do we use technology to bring these things to life? How do we use data to bring these things to life? That's all we need to do is go back into the research because we know what good learning looks like. So that's number one. Number two, unlike when I took that computer class in 9th grade, computers and technology and the cloud have wrapped itself around the core of everything that we do, and we don't even recognize it anymore. For example, how many of you have not used technology today? How many of you have not used the web today? My favorite answer is a teacher raised her hand. She was like, not me. I just checked the email, but that's it. Like somehow the email was living on her phone. How long did it take us to get to this point? The iPhone just turned 10 years old. The BlackBerry, God forbid you have a BlackBerry, there are two kinds of BlackBerry users. There are those that are embarrassed to have one, they keep it in their pocket, they never pull it out in public. And then the ones that are like, you're gonna pray this thing out of my cold dead hands. I'm gonna keep this forever, right? Those are the BlackBerry users that we have. That's 13 years old for BlackBerry. I remember when I used to have 2 of them on my belt. How long did it take us to get to this point? Do you remember we used to have to call the internet? Like, think about this. We used to have to place a phone call to the internet with our home phones, and the internet would be busy. and you were okay with this. You're like, the internet's busy. And like you would try a list of numbers that you had. And what's your expectation today? All right? I expect this week to be fully functional and respond to emails, if I can, while I'm traveling through space at 40,000 feet and flying at 535 miles an hour. I get frustrated when my web pages don't load very fast. Matter of fact, I was so excited because I'm not actually a fly on American Airlines, but I flew Delta here because that's the only airline that flies here. And they had the new super duper Wi-Fi on the plane from Phoenix to Salt Lake City. And they're like, go ahead, stream away, watch all the videos you want. And I'm like, yes, right? That's how fast this has moved. Our expectations of technology have changed, and we're the generation that was minding our own business when this thing called the internet showed up. Your life was perfectly fine before the web showed up. And if that's true for us, if we can't live without this technology and without the web and how it's integrated into everything that we do, what do you think that means to a generation of kids who don't know what the world looked like before Google? A generation of kids who don't know what the world looked like before smartphones and tablets and laptops. A generation of kids who don't know what the world looked like before Wi-Fi. It might be different in Montana because you have a lot more rural spaces, but if most kids, if you say to them, hey, we're gonna go stay at a place that doesn't have Wi-Fi, they're gonna look at you like you are weird. They're gonna look at you like, what is wrong? What? Are we staying in a cave? Where are we going? I don't know. They don't understand the world before the internet and the web. How do we take advantage of that? I'm not saying that this generation is different than we are. I'm not saying that they're wired different. I would be careful of anyone who would stand in a place like this and tell you that this generation is different, that they're wired differently. I've seen articles that tell you that this generation is born with the ability to use technology. No, they're not. They can multitask and do 2 or 3 things at the same time. No, they can't. They do 2 things at the same time poorly, just like you do 2 things at the same time. That's why I stop talking whenever anyone's looking at their phone. I just stop talking because you can't physically do that. But how they think about learning has changed. It has fundamentally changed from the way we look and think about learning, and we have to make ourselves conscious of that. We have to remind ourselves of that on a daily basis. We learn in a different way than they learn. Give you an example. This is my 16-year-old when he was 13, coming into my office, showing me his lines of code. Not that he was showing off his coding skills. He had a bug, couldn't fix it. Spending hours trying to fix it. And he asked me for help. I had no idea he was learning how to code. No concept. He never asked me, hey, what class can I take? What can I learn how to code? What teacher can teach me how to code? He just started learning how to code. Think about that. I work at Google, and he didn't ask me where you should learn how to code. He just started learning how to code. How do we take advantage of this? That the fact that when kids just want to learn, they go online and start learning. How do we help them build the skills to do that better, more effectively, more efficiently? Because when we think about what this generation is facing, again, our job is to prepare kids for the future, so we should probably understand what that future looks like. And a lot of that future is going to look like this. We talk about bringing back American jobs, but most of us, whether consciously or unconsciously, understand and know that those jobs aren't coming back. Only about 15% of jobs in this country have been lost to trade. That's it. The rest have been lost to automation. And in those jobs that we've lost to trade, they're being automated as well overseas. This is a picture of an Amazon warehouse where you guys order your paper towels from. And if you ever go visit one of these, you can find a like 6 football field deep factory or warehouse with random stuff in different bins that don't make any sense to you at all. Like, you know, toilet paper next to hairbrushes. It's just completely data driven. And you'll find 6 people that work there, and the rest of them are these little orange robots that do everything. So those jobs aren't going to be there. If you think about maybe jobs that we think people do, there's a good chance that those jobs are going to look like this, or the people will look like this. Robotics is continuing to develop, and what we can do with robotics today is just mind-blowing compared to just 5 years ago. Can you imagine what that's going to look like 20 years from now? And even if you can find a job that you think people will do, there's a good chance that it will be done by one of these. There are 4.5 million Americans that make a living by driving something. Driving people, driving supplies, driving people from the airport to their hotels. But here, there's one person that does it, and he made me wait an hour for him. Anyway, that's a personal problem. I ended up renting a car, but that's a whole other problem. But you could buy a self-driving car today. You don't have to wait 10 years. You can buy one today. As a matter of fact, it's not going to be very long before you're sitting in your car driving somewhere, and you're going to drive by a Tesla, and the guy in the front seat is going to be reading a newspaper while he's driving. It's going to freak you out. Technology, innovation, computer science, the cloud, all these things are changing what our jobs are going to look like. And this is I don't usually use a lot of busy slides, but I think this one's important to put up there in terms of what's going to be automated. Now, here's the thing that we have to think about. Often when we hear the word automation or robotics, we think that all our jobs are going to go away, or we think that, you know, lower level jobs are going to go away. The truth is, all our jobs are being impacted by technology or automation, and it's been that way for a long time. Right? The first time a farmer used a tractor, he was using automation. The first time he used a watering system, he was using automation. The first time you went into an office and used a calculator, you were using automation. You were complementing the technology and the innovation that was happening in the workspace, and that's going to continue to go. And you can see here that it's impacting all jobs. And whether it's these high value jobs that we have up in the corner, right? We're talking about real jobs, and it's expected that 50% of the jobs in metropolitan areas across the country will be impacted by automation. And we're not talking about factory level jobs, we're talking about sales jobs and retail jobs. As you can see there, some of the higher value jobs on the right-hand side. Loan officers, credit, finance people, right? when my 16-year-old is old enough to have money in his bank account, do you think he's going to trust some guy named Larry to tell him what his retirement account is going to be, or he's going to use an algorithm that predicts how much money he should save and where he should save it and where he should put it? Right? This is the future that we face, and the reality is technology is going to impact everything. Automation, computer science will impact everything. Again, I'm not saying that jobs are going away, I'm saying that jobs are changing. So for example, how many of you have gone into a bank to fill out a form to take out cash? When's the last time you did that? The young people in the room are going, you could do that. Like, you didn't even know you could do that. ATMs have taken over that role. But here's the thing. There are more bank tellers working in banks today than there were in the 90s when ATMs were introduced. They're just doing a different role. They're playing a different role. They're doing more high-value things for their customers. Think about supermarkets, right? Think about the cashiers in a supermarket. You often find during the busy times 10 people in these checkout lines or processing you, taking your cans, scanning them, putting them in a bag, and watching you. They don't even take cash from you, right? They're just watching you use the PIN, the machine. They're just processing. You're already starting to see self-checkouts at supermarkets, and companies like Amazon and others are building stores where you don't even need to use a cashier at all. You just take things off the shelf and put them in your bag and then just walk out of the store. I always had this vision of walking into a supermarket and just putting everything in my bags, and then as I walk out of the store, the exit way just scans everything that I have and charges my credit card. You can think about theft, loss issues. If you can do that, no one can ever steal anything again. You take a can of corn, stuff it in your jacket, and you're still going to pay for it. Does that mean that we're going to have less cashiers in supermarkets? Yes, but it could also mean that they'll be playing a different role. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to walk into one of these large supermarkets and actually find somebody that can help you find something? Right? Imagine one of these folks, instead of standing at the end of cashier lines, imagine they're actually in the aisles, there to help you find things. Maybe they become cooking experts or food experts. Oh, what are you making? Especially for guys, what are you making tonight for your wife's anniversary? And they can actually help you through the whole thing and help you get all the ingredients that you know, how to use them, right? Become consultant. Can actually upsell you on things better, but no, don't get her the 99-cent spaghetti, get this spaghetti for her. Right? Different role, more high-value roles. We automate the things that are just redundant. So what are the skills? And this is back to the data issue. What I hope we do is take all this information, this data that we have, and again, use it in the right way to focus on the real skills that kids need. And maybe stop measuring some of the things that we don't need to measure anymore. I'm going to show you a slide. We asked employers all over the world, what are the most important skills that you need your employees to know how to do? And I'm going to show you the results of that survey of employers all over the world. But here's the fascinating thing about this slide I'm about to show you. It's not fascinating at all. It's the same slide that we've been looking at for years. We know this. Problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity. We've been talking about this for so long, we call them 21st century skills. We are 18 years into the 21st century. There are kids who started in our school system in the fall that will be around in the 22nd century. We need to look at these skills from a different perspective because we've been looking at them for so long we've kind of lost perspective on it. I'll give you a couple of examples. First, we're still asking kids what you want to be when you grow up. I get the chance to talk to lots of students. I just did this last week. I go into schools and talk to kids, especially low-income schools. Love doing it. Whether it's in person or via Hangout, you have kids that you want me to talk to, I will talk to them. And I ask them all the time, how many of you have been asked what do you want to be when you grow up? And every single hand goes up. And here's the thing, from 5th grade on, every hand goes up. Here's the problem, that question doesn't make sense anymore. That question used to make sense when we were kids, but we're still using it. when we had like 20 jobs, right? We had like general categories of jobs, right? Jobs didn't move that much. You could be a lawyer, a doctor, an architect. I mean, we had lots of jobs, but they were pretty stable in terms of what they were. That's not true anymore. It's not going to be true even more so. 60% of the jobs of the future don't exist today. And that's going to continue. I'm working in a job and for a company that didn't exist when I graduated from graduate school. 20 years ago, it didn't exist. So what's 20 years from now going to look like? So what I think we should do instead is ask kids, what problem do you want to solve? Problems don't change. What's the problem that spins in your head? Because the more important question is the second question, which is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? And how do we measure that? How do we help them measure that so that they continue to move forward and building those knowledge, skills, and abilities? Doesn't have to be a world problem, doesn't have to be solving world hunger. It could be, making cars go faster. It could be a different color of blue. It could be having more than one cab company in Atlanta, Montana. I mean, whatever you guys want to focus on. It's the process of problem solving that we're trying to teach. Because that's the number one skill that we just mentioned. This is a picture of our Google Science Fair winners. The girl there in the middle was described, one of the winners was described as not your typical science student, but there was a problem that she wanted to solve. She had a friend, who she considered a very good friend, who lived in the Philippines, and her friend didn't have electricity. And she was upset that her friend couldn't read at night, couldn't do homework at night. So her project was to invent a flashlight that's powered by the heat of the human hand. And she was 15 years old when she did this. The capability and capacity that these kids have are amazing if we can turn them on to problem solving. It drives us all naturally. It gets us closer to what Daniel Pink talks about in his book Drive. I don't know if you got a chance to read Drive. A data-driven, research-based book that talks about what motivates all of us as human beings, and it's three things. And all of us, doesn't matter what you are, where you live, what you do in the world, three things motivate all of us. Purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And you need all three. What's the problem that you want to solve? How do you want to solve it? And what do you need to learn to solve it? It can help us drive education in a different direction. That's first. Second is this idea of critical thinking. But we currently give kids endpoints. We give them the things that we try to measure. Grades, test scores, endpoints. What's a B in journalism? That you got 80% of the facts right? That should be okay. What's a C in mathematics? That's passing, but is it? You need to think about how we measure things based on iteration. This idea that we constantly iterate, constantly innovate. You used Google last night, or Bing, whatever you want to pick, or, and then use it again today. There's a good chance you used a different version of Google, because we update Google 600 plus times a year. If you're using G Suite in schools, we update G Suite 200, 250 times a year. If you're using Chromebooks, the Chromebook team launches a new version of the operating system every 6 weeks, not every 6 years. We live in a world of constant and consistent iteration. How do we measure that? How do we measure iteration skills? How do we measure improvements? How do we do assessments in that way? Same thing is true for collaboration. We talk about collaboration in education, but we don't really mean it. Because education currently, again, set up great for the old world we lived in, is currently set up as a single-player sport. It's my 16-year-old who's responsible for his grades, his test scores, his assignments. The problem is that we live in a team-based world. Imagine, as a teacher, you hand out a 9th grade test. Now, I'm not saying a quiz. I'm a big fan of quizzes. Quizzes, I'm not a big fan of tests that we all know that all of us know, consciously or subconsciously, that kids spend a month memorizing for, they pass, and then you test them again 3 months later, they wouldn't know anything on that test. We know that. We have research and science that proves that that's true. But yet we still do that. What if you handed out a typical one of those tests, and at the end of the test, 2 kids came up to you from the back of the class saying, we decided to combine our skill set and work on this together. What would your reaction be? Why are we teaching our kids that collaborating is cheating for something that adds no value to them at all? Now flip that into my world, or even your world, and I go to Sundar, the CEO at Google, and I say, here's the education strategy. I did it all by myself. I'm sorry, what? Did I work with anybody on the team? No, they don't even know I did this. Did I get stakeholder input, feedback? Did I vet it with anyone? No one helped me with this. My parents did not help me with this. This is all mine. How many more minutes would I have my job? We live in a team-based world. And you know, representing New York City, I don't want to get soft and cheesy on you, but there is something beautiful where I work, where I've worked for 20 years, where I know that whatever idea I have, whatever strategy I come up with, whatever stupid thing that I come up with, that I know it's only going to get better when I put it in front of my team. That together, whatever we build is better than anything that I could ever come up with on my own. How do we create models that support real collaboration in education? The ability to work together, the ability to ask questions, the ability to seek clarification, the ability to influence, to build consensus. This is what drives the new economy. How do we make sure we're building these real collaboration skills for our kids? And again, how do we measure collaboration? It's hard to measure. Maybe that's why we don't do it as well. Then we want to make sure that we're building strong digital leaders, and I would start here. Again, just because these kids were born with technology doesn't make them technology experts. How do we create real digital leadership? Considering what they're facing in terms of the communication that's coming at them. 3.8 million Google searches every minute, 1.8 million snaps on Snapchat. Don't know what they're doing, but they're doing that. 46,000 pictures on Instagram. 400 hours of video gets uploaded on YouTube every minute. How do we help our kids sort through all that? How do we teach them to become digital leaders? To be mini digital scientists, data scientists? How do we help them do that? If they're not learning how to do this in school, where are they going to learn how to do this? Something that frightened me was, and I would encourage all of you to read, is a Stanford study on the fact that 82% of elementary school kids couldn't tell you the difference between a sponsored website and a news site. 82% can't tell you the difference. Those kids, those elementary school kids, one day are going to grow up and they're going to be 21 and they're going to come work for my new company. And I'm going to ask them to put together some financial data, some research for me, so I can present to investors, and I'm not going to know if it's real or not. And I'm going to get arrested, and it's going to be your fault. How do we help them build these digital leadership skills? And for you guys, how do we measure digital leadership skills? How do we measure what's really important facing the economy that we're facing? So what I think we need, again, isn't to blow up education, it's just a culture shift, to think about things from a different perspective. For example, we're still having debates, back to the testing idea, about whether kids should memorize things or not memorize things. And the idea, and the answer is both. Kids should memorize things and also not memorize things. We just have to figure out what's the difference and how do we measure those two things. For example, look, I have a 3-year-old. And for the last 2 years, I don't even know how long I've been doing this, as soon as she can sit in the bathtub, I got those letters, you know, the ones that stick to the side of the tub. I wanted to start training her right away. And I would pull out the A and I'd go, what's this? And she would say, A. And I'd beam with pride at her genius. And then I pull out the B and I go, what's this? And she'd look at me and go, A. I'm like, all right, we gotta work on this. I wanted her to memorize letters and numbers and pictures and words and facts and figures and lots of things. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves, how do we help kids take all that information and actually convert it into intelligence, which is what you guys are doing. How do we take data, how do we take information and convert it into real intelligence that we can use? You know, one of my favorite statistics, especially in this age of patriotism, is that only 7% of Americans can name you the first 4 presidents of the United States. And that was written as a bad article. Ooh, the 5 minutes just changed. Everyone got serious for a second. Maybe because I can point to one of you and ask you to name me the first 4 presidents, and if you don't know, you're going to be embarrassed. I can see the nervousness on someone. And then other people look at you after the conference and say, there's a guy who didn't know who the first 4 presidents were. And they laugh at you and make fun of you, even though they didn't know who the first 4 presidents were. Or I can give everyone in this room 30 seconds, and all of you can tell me who the first 4 presidents are. Information is a commodity. It has no value on its own. It's what we do with that information. So the question, or the test isn't, can you memorize the first 4 presidents and list them out on a test and not remember it 3 months from now? The question is, what are the 3 things the first 4 presidents agreed on? What are the 3 things they disagreed on? Who won those arguments, and how did that shape our country? I bet you 20 years from now they'll remember who the first 4 presidents are. It's asking ourselves, how do we change what we measure? It's asking, how do we change this idea of the data world that we live in? The good news is I'm starting to see the shift happen across the globe, here in the United States as well, where kids are working together, collaborating, where technology is there to support and enable what they do. Technology is not the silver bullet. Technology is there to support and enable great education. We need the new learning models where kids are driving learning and teachers are there to support and enable what they do, where kids are driving what they're curious about. We need to make sure that teachers, as what you guys are talking about for the last 2 days, have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to help create those models. Because it's not you guys that are going to build those models, it's them. How do we help them with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to create those models? How do we provide them the right measures, or how do we provide them the right data in building these models? Because at the end of the day, when that door closes, nothing's more important to a kid's education than having a great teacher that's well-informed in the classroom. How do we create that? And so how do we shift from what we know is an old education model that served the old economy very well to a new model that serves the new economy well, where kids are making things and building things and technology that support and enable what they do. We know, you look at this picture, you know that everything in this picture works from an educational perspective. Making things, building things, working together, collaborating, really collaborating. Teachers are there to guide and support and manage and teach. I'll give you a Google example that you guys might like because of what you do for a living. This is the original Google.com. This is it. Big, powerful, giant company started right here with these computers. Larry and Sergey at Stanford put a couple of machines together and did distributed computing from a different point of view, did search from a different point of view, different perspective, what we're talking about. Looked at it from a different perspective and came up with a whole new way to do search. And then this is what Google looks like today. This is one row, the gazillions of rows of servers that we have in data centers all over the world. And there's 3 things that I want to point out. First, this can happen anywhere today. You don't have to be in Northern California. You don't have to be tied into a culture or anything. This can happen right here, and if you have internet connectivity and access to the cloud, it can happen in rural Montana. 4 kids with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need can build anything today. That's the good news. The bad news is that can also happen in China and India and places that we can't even imagine. They have the same access. We're in a race. So that's one. Two, this is not what Google looked like on Monday, and then this is what it looked like on Thursday. We need some patience. This took 18 years of what we're talking about. 18 years of collaboration, communication, creativity, working together. Two guys started it, and 18 years of what we're talking about. And the third thing is that this is not what a data center is going to look like in the future. But here's the catch. There is no future data center. There's just the next wire, the next casing, the next light bulb, the next hardware update, the next software update, the next cooling system, the next floor. It's just a constant and consistent iteration. We're not going to wait 18 years to create the new data center. We have to constantly move it forward. And the same is true in education. There is no future classroom. There is no future school. There's just what we do on Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then Thursday, using the data that we have to help continuously iterate and innovate what we do in education. The world is dramatically changing. And data is coming at us from a whole bunch of different places. And education will change and evolve over time. This is a picture of my 3-year-old about 6 months ago. Oh no, actually now, wow, time goes fast. This is probably in January. We got one of those Google Homes. Anyone have one of those assistants, whether Alexa or one of those things? All right, so you have one of those devices at home that help you, assistants, that everyone buys, is really excited about for a week, and then never uses again. We got one from Google, and I set this thing up, really easy, connect to the internet, do it with your phone, and it's up and running in like 5 seconds. And so my wife and I are messing with this thing. Okay, Google, what time is it? Okay, Google, what's the weather in New York? Okay, Google, play a song. My daughter's watching all this. Not involved at all. She comes and walks between us. She looks at the thing and goes, okay, Google, play the Spider-Man song. And she's a big Spider-Man fan. You haven't noticed she's got a Spider-Man cape on it. She thinks she wants to be Spider-Man when she grows up. No response, because it doesn't recognize her voice. And then she says it again. Okay, Google, play Spider-Man song. No response. She looks up at me and she goes, Bobby, Google's broken. Her expectation of technology will dramatically change over time. What happens when it's not broken? What happens when it can answer her question? What happens when she asks the device, why is the sun hot? And this device recognizes that she's 4 years old and answers her in a 4-year-old answer. Or is 10 years old and answers her in a 10-year-old answer. Or better yet, asks her a question. Why do you think it's hot? And then uses that information or that response to build a learning train for her in instant real time. How do we measure that world? How do we look at data in that world? So as I close out, I need you to think about not my necessary 3-year-old, but any 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, any little kid. Now I want you to think about whatever technology it is that you have, whether it's your iPhone, your Dell computer, your MacBook, your iPad extra large, your iPhone 12. No. For me, I was gonna say my Google Pixel, but mine broke, so this is my old Nexus. The latest and greatest innovation from the most innovative company in the world 2 years ago. And I want you to think about that 5-year-old and realize that that's the worst technology they'll ever see in their life. That 20 years from now, she's gonna find this device sitting in a 50-cent box at the thrift store. She's gonna say, hey, my dad had one of these, I have to get this. Because she's going to want to put on her shelf like a museum piece. The way I know some of you have on your shelves like museum pieces. And she's going to remember. She's going to be with younger siblings that don't remember that time. or younger friends, and she's going to say, you guys look, that's the port. And they're like, what was that for? I'm like, I swear you're not going to believe it. But there are things on YouTube that'll show you this. This is true. My dad plugged this thing into the wall. And younger friends are going to be like, what do you mean? Like, take it out of the box and plug it in the wall once to activate the nuclear battery? And no! Every day. For hours, he had this thing plugged into the wall. Those are the kids who are starting in our school system. How do we create the learning models? How do we use data to create the learning models for the future that they face? How do we create the environments where they can build the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that they need to solve the problems that not only are they facing, but that they're interested in solving? That's what we're doing. That's our goal. That's why we gather at events like this, to prepare kids for that future. Thank you guys very much for having me. This is exciting for me because usually there's like 5,000 people in the room, so I don't ever get a chance to actually want to see everyone's face. And two, answer any questions that you guys have. So you tell me when to cut off, but if anyone has any questions or thoughts. Okay, you're all stunned. Yeah?
I'm curious, you just did a presentation for a bunch of adults in their 30s on up, probably. Give us a snapshot of what you say to a teenager.
I say, what problem do you want to solve? I want you to think about the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to solve that problem. And where can you get those knowledge, skills, and abilities, and don't let school get in your way. What classes can you take? Online, offline. Don't let anyone dictate what your course to study should be. You can do it. You have the world at your fingertips. What the teenagers don't understand is that and I tell them the story, when I was a kid, when my information place was the Columbus Library on 51st Street and 10th Avenue. That's where I had to go get information. So if you asked me a question when I was 10 years old or 14 years old, and you said, what happened on December 7th, 1941? Or who were the first 4 presidents? I'm like, I don't know, but I will find out and I will be back tomorrow with that information for you. It took 24 hours sometimes to get that information. Because I would go to the library, some of us could go home and get to our encyclopedias, right? I didn't have encyclopedias. I was too poor to have encyclopedias. I had like the M, right? When the sales guy would say you can buy the M for $9.99 and put your we always had the M. We had a whole bunch of M's. Sorry, I just got a flashback. We had the encyclopedias, or we had to go to the library. I had to go to the library. To a building that closed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Basketball practice went to 5 o'clock. Wasn't open on the weekends. Was open on Saturdays during certain times. Or if I could find the book that I was looking for, if I memorized the 19-digit card catalog number, because everyone always stole the little pencils that were by the thing. I had to memorize. I could take a picture of it with my phone. Can you actually take a picture of the card catalog and then having to go to the store, develop it, and figure it out? I just got that thought. And I had to go find the book. There was a good chance the book wasn't there because it wasn't my library. It was everyone who went to PS 111 and PS 45 and PS 51 and Sacred Heart and Holy Cross and all the other schools in the community. And everyone who lived in Hell's Kitchen. Today, those kids have 100 million Columbus libraries at their fingertips instantaneously. And they don't appreciate that. So I talk to them about that appreciation, that they have the world at their fingertips, and that they can reach out to anyone in the world and talk to them. So if they're interested in data science, for example, you don't think that there are experts in data science that would love to hear from a 16-year-old kid saying, hey, I'm really interested in the work that you're doing. I want to follow in your footsteps. Can we chat about what you learned? So I tell them to break down the barriers. Don't get into the mindset of what we consider school, that they don't have a path, that they can create their path. So that's what I talk to them about. Sorry, that was a long answer. Yeah?
So I'm interested in your thoughts on higher education. So you talked about school, and I noticed in the the slide about the future professions, teacher was still on the hard to replace.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm seeing, and I get with K-12, that's really true. There's probably a daycare thing there, and but when I see MOOCs and I see digital micro-credentials and more focus on just-in-time preparation for a job, a task, a certain team you're on.
Right.
I wonder about the future of the university. You've been thinking about probably things like that for a long time.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think one, first, let's start with this, because I often have to answer this question. Technology is not going to replace teachers, ever. As a matter of fact, teachers' roles become more important than the role that we're facing. You often hear people say, teacher as a facilitator, to get them off the stage and be a facilitator. I hate the word facilitator. Hate it, because I don't want to be a facilitator. If you think about, I hate to use sports analogies because I don't want to get sports, but think about whatever sport you're in, like let's say basketball. Think about all the people who participate in a basketball game. The referee is the facilitator. No skin in the game, could care less who wins. As a matter of fact, is focused on not caring who wins, and is there to be facilitator, to facilitate the beginning to the end of that game. I don't want a teacher doing that. I want a teacher being the coach. The guy who can't play, but sweats just as much as the people who are playing. I want that to be the teacher, right? So the role of the teacher doesn't change. And so same is true for higher education in the sense that if teachers play that, if all teachers do is stand up at the university and lecture on something that a kid can watch on a video, yeah, they're going to go away. But the role of the professor is also changing. And a lot of it has to do with data. And so a lot of innovation in terms of learning models are happening in K-12. A lot of the innovation around data science is happening in higher ed. Where universities can take data and say, hey, you got a C in chemistry, you're going to fail out of school in 2.4 years. Right? They can see that. But again, against the current model of learning, right? The problem is that it's changing. At Google, we don't require a college degree to work at Google. We used to, but we don't anymore. What does that do to change the higher education landscape? So lots of issues facing higher education. Less kids, right? So schools are recruiting less kids. There's less kids just in general. The next generation of kids, there's just a less number of them. So that's one issue. Two, changing demographics, right? Today in K-12, 1 out of every 4 kids is Latino, for example. And that includes states like Montana. In some states, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, it's like 3 out of 4. The current model of higher education is we pack up little Johnny in the station wagon, we drive him up to State U, and we cry when we drop him off at the dorms. That's not going to apply to the changing demographics. Lots of Latino fathers all over the country whose daughters are going to go to them and say, hey, I just got into Princeton. And the father's like, all right, I don't care, you're staying here. Your job is to take care of your brothers and sisters. How do we bring higher education to that? Right, what is the change? So there's lots of issues that they're facing, lots of work, but I would say that they're starting to think about that from a data perspective on how they manage that. But yes, absolutely the role of higher education is changing.
So I see, you mentioned not replacing teachers. I like to say replacing teachers. So re-place.
Yeah.
Teachers move to a higher place where they're working on the higher order skills, evaluating team projects and team collaboration and things like that. So if we could elevate the teacher's role, but still I think they'll be coming for shorter things like at Stanford 2025. They talked, one of the visions from that was you don't have a major, you have a mission, which is back to what problem we're trying to solve. And then universities might end up putting together sets of things that aren't as big as courses or as big as degrees, but are appropriate right size.
And actually, and we didn't even talk about the new generation, Generation Z, right? Those that are between the ages of 4 and 16 and what their expectations are. 70% of Generation Z kids don't want to work for you at all. They want to do their own thing, right? And that changes things. Only about 11% of Americans run their own businesses because it was hard to run your own business, right? You needed inventory and cash and all this. Today, 2 kids with 2 laptops can start anything, right? So it changes things. My daughter is working at CNN, and this is her first job. She worked all through college, not at a job, on projects. right? So it's different what's happening in the space. So the changing demographics, the changing expectation of students. We went to college, it didn't matter what we majored in, as long as we went to college, right? Like how many people do you know that are working in a field that have nothing to do with the degree they got, right? And that's not true anymore. This generation expects their degree or their certificate or whatever it is that they're learning to be tied to outcomes. So how do we create higher education models for that? So yeah, lots of change. I get to speak at higher education conferences as well, and that's what we talk about. We talk about, you know, the title of my presentation is Generation Z is going to college and you're not ready. Because they're not. Yes?
I'm going to articulate this a little bit. What are you seeing or hearing? I think one of the issues that we have is we've been talking about 21st century skills, digital leadership. As educators, I know we all know the value of we see kind of what you present today. We're on the same page. But one of the things with where we are right now in that transition is, you know, we're in this accountability stage where we have to show progress and account for what we're doing. And we just hung up on how do we measure that? And what are you seeing or discussion that you're having on how do we measure so we can show the value and that students are making progress?
Sure. So I always like to, again, start with from a different perspective, is I like to look at the world that there are 3 sets of laws in the world, right? There are what I call physical laws, right? So if I throw this microphone, there's a really good chance it's going to fall to the floor, right? Like the mathematical formulas that we use are scientific across the board. Physical laws don't change for the most part. They're starting to change, but that's a whole other subject. That's one. 2, the second group are what I call God's laws, right? Cultural laws that we all abide by. Nobody walked in this conference naked. You didn't have to worry about it. Well, also, we weren't in San Francisco, so you didn't have to worry about it. But we have, you know, cultural laws, God's laws. Those also change over time, but a lot slower. And then the third set of rules or laws that we have are what are called man-made laws. And everything that you worry about, everything that you talk about are man-made laws. Which of those 3 are easiest to change? Let's go focus on that, right? Everything that you talk about is self-made. We did it, right? It's not they, it's we. So it's a collective effort where we change it, right? And you're starting to see that happen in some states. You're starting to see that happen in some districts. You're starting to see district superintendents say, yeah, I don't care about your test scores anymore. I'm doing it my way. So you're starting to see that movement. You're seeing parents in New York, for example, opt out of standardized testing. High numbers. Or standardized testing rooms have like 2 or 3 students in them now. So you're starting to see that movement, but those are all in that category. So how do we change that category? It's up to us to do it. Yeah?
So assessments are like an objective measure, for lack of a better word.
Okay, I won't accept that word, but I will for purposes of this argument.
Okay. So they're a measure that we
They're a
rely
measure.
on. Okay. So how do we measure what you're talking about? How do we measure progress without an assessment?
I believe we do need assessments. What was your grade for your performance in your job last year? You didn't get a grade, did you? But you were assessed, right? So hopefully you got a performance review, right? That told you what your strengths were, told you what your areas of improvement were, put you on a path or a guideline of how to get better at it. And now this year can evaluate how you did against last year, right? So we do that currently. We do that at Google. I don't get a grade, right? But someone's assessing me and my skills and what I do. We always do that. So it's about finding the right measures. Just because they might be harder or more subjective, because subjective isn't necessarily a bad thing, then, you know, I think I'm a communication expert, and if you want me to see your communication skills, I can probably give you a very subjective assessment of that based on me, right? Based on what I believe. It doesn't have to be objective. And so it's how do we measure the important things? And again, back to the first thing, we measure what gets done is what gets measured. And so we start changing what we measure, that's what we'll focus on. So you can measure collaboration, you can measure critical thinking skills. There's lots of ways of doing that. So there's a great product called, and I'm not pitching one product or another, I purposely don't join boards of ed tech companies or any of that just to stay objective. But there's an organization called, I already forgot, Mind Research, MIND Research. They have a product called ST Math, right? You guys familiar with ST Math? ST Math is one of my favorite products in the world. Non-profit, by the way. And what it is it's a math program, but it's not a math program. It gives you grades. Kids sit in front of it, and the first thing they have to define, the first thing they have to do is identify the problem. The problem's not presented to them. They see a penguin and a plank and some wood sticks or whatever it is that the first screen is. The first thing the first thing they do is realize and figure out what the problem is. And the problem is they got to get the penguin from one side to the other side. And how do they do that with what they have? And they build things, on screen, and they do it. And then when they solve that problem, they move up to the next level, and then the next level. And there's no grade. I can clearly see that they're getting better at problem solving. I can clearly see they're getting better at math from watching them progress through that program. So there's lots of ways of doing this, but we need, part of what I hope we do in rooms like this is identify what are those things that really matter based on what we just talked about, and how do we measure those things? Yes?
So what would you suggest in the education arena when you have children who can't read to a certain level or calculate to a certain degree? 10th graders who haven't developed that skill.
Right.
What do you suggest for us as we guide our teachers to go toward problem solving when they lack basics?
Yeah, no, well, all this assumes that kids know how to read, right? Like that's part of, how do they get to 10th grade not knowing how to read is the better question, right? When people ask me, when people ask me for my advice on a young kid, like a preschool kid, or what should they be? Should they be coding? Should they be doing this? No, they should be reading books. And they should be reading books and reading books and reading books and reading books, and not to be measured against reading those books, but just reading. And I don't care. My 6-year-old goes to a really hard high school and has lots of homework that I'm not a big fan of, but we can get into that. Has lots of work to do, and just bought Stephen King's book It. Right? Have you ever seen a physical copy of Stephen King's It? It's like that big, right? We have a rule in our house. You can buy any book. You don't have to ask permission to buy books. You can just buy. You can order books whenever you want. We've had that rule forever. It's this constant reading. So I would say to reevaluate what we're doing in pre-K, in kindergarten, in first grade. And if they're not just reading the entire time, they're doing it wrong. Right? At the end of the day, it's reading and writing. And the same is true for math, right? Math, but not in terms of memorizing formulas so that you can pass the test, but the application of mathematics in what we do. So if you're looking at a 10th grader that can't read, I would spend the rest of the year teaching him or her how to read. And just get that down. And no matter what their standardized test scores are, just give them the gift of reading, the ability to read, the love of reading. And don't measure them on it. Just measure how many books they read. That's it. And reward them for that. But just reading is the most important thing. So yeah, let's make an assumption that by 10th grade, you're reading a book a week. And not tell them what to read. I hated that. How many of you hated that? Like, you must. Oh, I'm not here. How many of you read books and you're like, I don't want to read this book? Right? Give them a list of books to pick from. Let them have ownership of it. Back to the whole thing of autonomy. They have to feel autonomy. The Stand. I've read, and I'm actually writing a book right now. I've read thousands of books. And my favorite book in the world is The Stand by Stephen King. I can teach a class on The Stand. Anyone read The Stand? I can teach a class on The Stand in terms of politics, culture, society, good versus evil. There's great books to read. Yes?
I'm going to push back on the question that was just asked.
Yeah.
Because I feel like your answer was, let's go back in time and remediate these kids at an earlier age, which early investment
Sure.
I know is helpful. But what do you do for the really remedial kid then that does not have that family structure to incentivize reading? It's easy to say, let's do this at a household level, but what do you do at the school level?
Sure, no, and again, I would take them out and make them read, like teach them how to read. Like I don't understand. So here's the thing: we have to ask ourselves in education is what we're doing, what we're measuring about us or about the kid.
For sure.
So ask yourself, are we measuring for the benefit of the kid, or are we measuring for us? And so if that kid, if I see a 10th grader that can't read, I'm going to spend the rest of the year teaching that kid how to read. I don't care what test scores they have to take, because that's about us. What that kid needs is a measure around reading. So it's that individualized approach to creating the measures that make sense for those kids through progress, the progress that they're making. So yeah, no, I'm glad that you clarified it, because I'm being very clear.
Individualized.
Read, right? Teach that kid how to read. Don't assume that they're going to learn how to do this at home, right? Give them that space of time to read. Like, can you imagine being in 10th grade and like, what do you do in school all day? I just read books. I've learned how to read. I'm better at it now. That's gonna prepare them better than any standardized test you're gonna give them.
I feel like you're sort of talking about sort of the fundamental paradoxes in education. I work in education research, and I work in a lot of work. And, you know, we have these tensions between sort of personalization and collaboration, between sort of meeting individual kids where they're at and serving a whole class. And I think my experience over 20 years of kind of understanding schools and school improvement is educators are in a constant conundrum about what to do and how to do it. And I think, so I appreciate and so I think that's sort of like there's a little tension building, because it's like, oh, you know, teaching actually is rocket science.
Right, yeah.
And we pay our teachers not nearly the level of rocket science money.
Right, yeah.
So I'm just curious, kind of like bigger picture, kind of what Google's role is or is not in sort of this national conversation around some of this policy stuff and some of the like teacher salary project or like elevating educators, because what you're asking of teachers is bigger than I think what the system.
So a couple of things about that. One is I've worked in 12 years working in the education space, 7 years before that working in the consulting space. So I've worked, and 2 years before that working for Governor Cuomo in New York. So I've worked in government, I've worked in nonprofit space, I've sat on boards in nonprofit space, I've worked in finance, I've worked in banking, I've worked in healthcare, I worked 9 months at United Health Group in Minneapolis, and I've worked in education. And I can tell you, out of all that experience, there is no more passionate or dedicated workforce than teachers, period. Not even close. You know, they show up on Saturdays, and who in the finance world or healthcare cries when they start talking about the work that they do, right? So turn them on, right? They're not becoming teachers to become multimillionaires, right? They have a purpose. Now we just got to give them autonomy, right? So I'm part of the school that we helped build in Phoenix called by the way, all this works. Everything I'm talking about works. So there's a school in Phoenix called the Phoenix Coding Academy. That's the school I teach at. And this was an idea that I had based on all the things that we just talked about 3 years ago, that I pitched to the superintendent and said, hey, we can build a new kind of high school. Let's take computer science and embed it into all the subjects, right? So it's computer science and biology, computer science and history, and computer science and art. It's in all the subjects. It's the project-based language that kids learn at the school. It's what they use to work on their projects. And and this is not a private school, it's not a charter school, it's not a Google school, it's a regular high school inside the Phoenix Union High School District. And it's not a select school. We have an application process, but we don't look at grades, we don't look at test scores, we look at passion. We look at what do you want to do with computer science? What's your level of computer science? And we take everyone from, I have no idea what computer science is, to I've built my own servers, right? And we take every one of those kids. And how did we create that model, that learning model that we built? We hired 9 teachers and a principal. We got funding to hire 9 principals and a teacher. 9 teachers and a principal. The other way wouldn't work at all. 9 teachers and a principal, and we hired them 9 months before the school opened. And we said to them, you're not hired, you're official teachers, full-time teachers, with no kids. And you're going to teach to the biology teacher. We said, you're going to teach biology and computer science at the exact same time. And here's a blank sheet of paper. Good luck! And we left them all. And they built it. And then they did it for 10th grade, and now We're going to do it for 11th grade. So we started with 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade, and everything that we talk about. There's no homework at the school. There are no grades at the school. And we're trying to get rid of the standardized tests, right? And we're trying to create new kinds of assessments. I'm teaching a communication class there, and I have to give them an assessment with no grades. Kind of easy to do in a communication span, because I can literally film them the first time they do a presentation, and then show them a film at the end, 12 weeks later, or 12 classes later, and show them their progress. Right? I can do that. But we built it. It's totally doable. We can do this. But my point is that it's not about adding to teachers' workload. I don't want to do that. It's about having them create what their workload should be. And it's not about personalized, we talk about personalized learning, that seems to be the latest fad in the education space. I think I'm okay with that as long as we move to what I consider personal learning, right? Where the kids are driving the learning, where they have the autonomy to pick and choose based on a menu of things that they want to work on. School's great. My favorite thing about the school is that I show up to teach. I teach all day, a couple times every 2 weeks, and I show up at, I think I show up at 7:30, and that's early. School starts at 8, and by the time I get there, there's not another kid that comes into the school after me because they are already there. They show up at 7, 6:30 to work on their projects. It's not school. They're working on projects. And those projects can go from one semester to the next semester. We're hoping that some projects kids work on for 4 years. And so we can do this. This is totally doable. Yeah?
So I really like what you're saying about the cross-disciplinary programs like you described your school. And I think that that is definitely where the economy is moving in the future, like you said. That, you know, there's not a business analyst and an IT person, and a business analyst knows IT.
Right.
But I also see that we're kind of in this transition time where the people graduating from with a business degree, they know IT work and they might have that programming background, but the people doing the hiring don't see that. They still want to silo off IT from business. They still want to have a data scientist instead of an economist who does the same type of work, but in the person who's doing the hiring mind, IT is still a separate part. So when we're moving people through schools where it is cross-disciplinary, how do we get to communicate to employers that this is a hireable skill and that they have those IT skills that are needed, especially when we continue to silo off IT programs?
Right. So that's a great question because I think we are in a transition. And part of it is we have to get comfortable with the idea that we're in a transition. Unfortunately, we're born at the wrong time, right? Because we're going through what people like us went through in 1900. When everyone was working on farms and we started building factories when the Industrial Revolution happened. How do you take farming skills and bring them to the factory? And what does that transition look like? And how do people move to the cities? We went through that in the 1900s. I think we're going through that now, right? We're going through that second wave with the new economy, this digital economy that we're facing. So we are. So let's just deal with the fact that we're going through a transition. And yeah, as a parent, like I got a 16-year-old, I'm trying to keep his grades low enough so that he doesn't get into Stanford or Princeton, because that's $60,000 a year. I don't have that. For what, right? So yeah, we are going as parents. Like, do we send our kids to college? Do we not send them to college? Like, what is that experience like? So yeah, absolutely, we have to admit that we're going through a transition. But we also have to look for signs that the transition is also happening on the other side. So for example, I already mentioned Google doesn't hire people with college degrees, right? We're changing what assessments look like, right? So how do I know your knowledge, skills, and abilities? You're starting to see companies develop toolkits that can help you identify your knowledge, skills, and abilities. Right? If you say, right now, think about the interviewing process. Even at a company like Google, we're still using the same process that we used for 100 years, which is the guy shows up in a suit that he rented, and like I do, and he sits there and we interview him, right? We play gotcha. We try to stump him on questions. We ask him questions that he's already prepared for. That doesn't tell me anything, right? It's ridiculous, right? So we're starting to see a shift in what those interviews look like, where I can do an assessment, like show me your credentials, show me your capabilities. Let me do an assessment. I don't even test you. Yep, you're good. Everything in your portfolio makes sense to me, right? So we're starting to see some of that, not as fast as all of us would like, but we have to deal with the fact that we're in that transition. Yeah.
So I had just talked about portfolios with her because I think that we're kind of isolated here in Montana. I don't think that we are. We're not, because of technology, we can get all kinds of ideas. So I know that there are portfolios out there. And I work in a middle school, and I wonder, like, out there in the world, do you see a lot of portfolios? Because I think kids should be walking out with a portfolio is more important than a certificate and their transcripts. So they should be building a portfolio of their skills that they can share with an employer or anyone. And say, these are some of the things I've worked on, these are my projects, this is, you know, I think out there in the world, is that